When Leonardo DiCaprio entered the secluded establishment tucked away in New York City, his expectations were modest, simply to enjoy a quiet meal in solitude. Then it happened. A voice penetrated the ambient noise, raw and haunting, filled with an emotion he couldn't dismiss. In that singular moment, everything transformed. Something about this young performer, about this melody, felt distinctly unusual. Too authentic, too intimate. Leonardo wasn't aware yet, but this evening wouldn't be just another peaceful retreat. It would draw him into a narrative he never anticipated encountering. Before we delve further into this account, please share your location in the comments. And if these narratives resonate with you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We've prepared another exceptional story for you tomorrow. The balmy evening air in New York carried aromas of exotic spices, fresh-baked bread, and the distinctive rhythm of jazz emanating from softly illuminated establishments. The metropolis, vibrant with melodies and enigmas, was a complex weave of narratives concealed within its cobblestone passageways. Leonardo DiCaprio traversed the constricted streets, his gait deliberately unhurried, his head slightly angled beneath his baseball cap's brim. He had traveled for a film gathering, but he had never found red carpet events as captivating as those unassuming, tranquil moments where he could observe the world without being the subject of attention. Tonight, he sought nothing extravagant, just a simple repast in an establishment where anonymity was possible. That's when he discovered it. A modest, inconspicuous eatery without ostentatious signage or cues at its entrance, merely warm illumination filtering through windowpanes and the subtle sound of cutlery connecting with dishware. The kind of venue exclusively frequented by locals. Inside, the atmosphere was rustic and personal. Wooden furnishings aged with time, shelves arranged with dust-covered wine bottles, and gentle, wavering candlelight bathing the space in golden luminescence. The aroma of slow-prepared Creole cuisine permeated the environment. Leonardo selected a corner table distanced from the entrance. A server in his middle years approached with a casual smile, presenting a menu. His eyes showed no flicker of identification. Perfect. He requested a straightforward plate of jambalaya and wine, desiring nothing more than to immerse himself in the cadence of the evening. As his meal was being prepared, he allowed his gaze to wander. The restaurant buzzed with activity, yet maintained a peaceful ambience. Couples engaged in hushed conversations. A gathering of friends shared laughter over communal dishes. A woman at a neighboring table wrote fervently in a weathered notebook, absorbed in her private universe. For the first time in what seemed like an eternity, Leonardo exhaled deeply, his thoughts finally settling. But then, the atmosphere shifted. It began subtly, like a whisper floating through the space. Leonardo's head lifted involuntarily. In the distant corner of the establishment, a small platform had been arranged. Nothing elaborate, merely a stool, microphone, and antiquated speaker. And standing there, gripping the microphone with both hands, was a young girl. She couldn't have been older than 15. Yet there was something about her presence that seemed larger than life. Her eyes remained closed, her brows slightly creased as if holding onto something invisible to others. And then, she began to sing. Her voice wasn't merely beautiful, it was haunting. Leonardo's breath caught momentarily. There was something distinctive in her vocal delivery. A rawness. A heaviness that seemed incongruous with childhood. Each note conveyed a narrative, an emotion too profound for someone so young. The restaurant fell silent. Conversation ceased, utensils were set aside, and all that remained was the sound of her voice weaving through the air like a specter. Leonardo experienced a tremor along his spine. He had encountered remarkable vocalists before. He had witnessed performances that moved audiences to tears. But this? This was fundamentally different. She clutched the microphone tightly, as if it were the sole thing preventing her emotional collapse. There was no nervousness, no hesitation, only emotion, pure and unfiltered. And that emotion? It resonated like a desperate plea. The melody concluded, and for a moment, the room remained suspended in silence. Then, gradually, a wave of applause began. It started hesitantly, then intensified, louder and stronger, filled with sincere admiration. The girl opened her eyes and offered a small, reserved smile before descending from the platform. She moved carefully between tables, carrying a small donation receptacle. Leonardo observed her attentively. Something within him stirred. That voice. That anguish in her melody. It wasn't merely a performance. It was a supplication. But why? Leonardo felt a chill course through him. That voice. That pain embedded in the melody. It transcended mere performance. It was a desperate appeal. But what prompted it? Leonardo couldn't dismiss the sensation. Even as the restaurant reverted to its customary rhythm, conversations resuming, cutlery connecting with plates once more, his thoughts remained fixated on the girl. Who was she? And more significantly, why did her voice carry such profound sorrow? He watched as she moved between tables, graciously accepting crumpled currency and loose coins in her small donation box. There was no arrogance in her manner, no expectation, just quiet gratitude. Leonardo signaled the server discreetly. "Who is she?" he inquired, maintaining a low voice. The server glanced toward the girl and exhaled. "That's Emma. She performs here most evenings." Leonardo studied her again. She was young, too young for such employment. Yet she carried herself with an air of quiet resolve, like someone compelled to mature prematurely. "She doesn't receive payment?" Leonardo questioned. The server shook his head. "No, she sings for donations." Leonardo frowned. "Why?" The server hesitated momentarily, then leaned slightly closer. His voice softened. "She's accumulating funds for her grandfather's medical procedure." Leonardo felt a constriction in his chest. "She does this every night?" "Almost," the server confirmed. "She's been coming here for months. Some regular patrons contribute what they can afford, but it's never substantial." He sighed, his expression troubled. Her grandfather, Brad, was once a respected craftsman. Restored numerous historic buildings in town. But now he's ill. Requires surgery, but refuses to accept charity. Leonardo's grip on his glass tightened. The fragments were connecting. Emma wasn't merely a girl with exceptional vocal talent. She was a child, struggling against circumstance, bearing a weight too substantial for her narrow shoulders. And her grandfather, he was a man ensnared by his own pride and helplessness. Leonardo exhaled slowly, gazing at the wine swirling in his glass. He recognized that pain intimately. The sensation of wanting to assist someone beloved, yet feeling completely powerless to alter their fate. He had experienced it previously, and he couldn't simply disengage from it now. Across the restaurant, Emma continued collecting contributions. Some patrons gave generously, pressing folded bills into her hands with sympathetic expressions. Others barely acknowledged her, dropping loose change into the box without verbal exchange. She accepted everything identically, thanking each person with quiet sincerity. When she reached Leonardo's table, she paused. Up close, he could discern the exhaustion in her bright, perceptive eyes. She didn't immediately recognize him, just another stranger in a city teeming with faces. Leonardo retrieved his wallet. He didn't want to overwhelm her with an excessive amount, not immediately. Instead, he placed a $100 bill into the box. Emma's eyes widened. "Sir, this is excessive." He smiled gently. "Consider it appreciation for your talent." She hesitated, looking down at the money, then back up at him. "Thank you," she said quietly. Her voice was so different now, soft, almost fragile. Nothing like the powerful force that had filled the room moments earlier. Leonardo paused before asking, "How is your grandfather's condition?" Emma blinked, surprised. Most people didn't inquire. They simply contributed money and continued their evening. She bit her lip, gripping the donation box slightly tighter. He's doing his best, she said carefully. But Leonardo heard what remained unspoken. She was afraid that regardless of how frequently she performed, regardless of how much she raised, it wouldn't be sufficient. Leonardo nodded, as if he understood completely, because he did. Leonardo watched the girl as she walked away. There was something in her voice that resonated with him, something that echoed the pain he once carried. But he knew this narrative was far from concluded. Leonardo sat silently, observing Emma's movements through the restaurant. The burden on her small shoulders was undeniable. She was young, but she carried herself with the quiet resilience of someone who had learned to confront challenges prematurely. His fingers traced the rim of his wine glass as his mind replayed her performance. The way her voice seemed to implore the world, how it fractured slightly in places, not from weakness, but because she experienced every word she sang. The more he considered it, the more he realized, this transcended financial concerns. Emma wasn't merely collecting donations, wasn't merely performing. She was attempting to preserve something, someone, before time expired. And Leonardo couldn't ignore that reality. As she passed by his table again, he gently raised a hand. "Emma?" She paused, surprised. Few people remembered her name after her performance. Most simply contributed a few bills to her box and resumed their lives. But this man was different. He didn't regard her like the others. He wasn't merely impressed by her vocal abilities. He perceived something deeper, something she wasn't certain she wanted exposed. She hesitated, then approached closer. "Yes?" Leonardo offered a small smile, gesturing to the vacant seat across from him. "Join me briefly." Emma glanced around uncertainly. She was expected to complete her collection before returning home. But something about this man, his quiet kindness, his gentle patience, compelled her to pull out the chair and sit down. For several moments, neither spoke. Leonardo allowed her to breathe. Then, finally, he asked, "How's your grandfather doing, truly?" Emma's fingers tightened around the table's edge. "I told you, he's doing his best," she said, forcing a smile. But Leonardo maintained his gaze. He waited, the way people do when they genuinely care about the response. Emma's smile faltered. She exhaled, looking down at the small donation box in her lap. "He's deteriorating," her voice was barely above a whisper. Leonardo nodded. He had anticipated this. She swallowed hard. "He keeps saying he doesn't want to burden anyone." Her small hands clenched into fists. "He doesn't want me doing this, singing for money. But what alternatives do I have?" Her voice cracked, revealing the weight of her desperation. Leonardo felt something deep in his chest contract. He recognized that feeling, watching someone beloved gradually slip away. The helplessness of knowing that regardless of how fiercely you fight, it might prove insufficient. But he also knew something else: she shouldn't have to fight alone. Emma wiped at her eyes quickly, embarrassed. "Sorry, I don't usually discuss this." Leonardo shook his head. "No apologies necessary." Emma looked at him, truly looked at him. "You understand, don't you?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, I do." She waited, expecting elaboration. But he offered none, because certain kinds of pain transcend verbal expression. After a moment, she straightened, pushing emotions aside as she had learned to do for so long. "I just need to persevere. I must ensure we accumulate enough." Leonardo studied her, this girl, this warrior in disguise, battling challenges most adults couldn't manage. Part of him wanted immediate resolution, to withdraw his wallet and provide sufficient funds for every hospital expense, every financial burden, so she would never worry again. But he knew better. If Brad matched her description, he wouldn't accept a stranger's financial assistance. And Emma wasn't merely fighting for her grandfather's life, she was fighting for his dignity. Leonardo couldn't simply offer a solution. He needed to discover an alternative approach. Leonardo watched as Emma stood up, preparing to depart. There was something in her voice that lingered with him, something that reminded him too vividly of his own past. And that's when he recognized, this narrative wasn't finished. The following morning, Leonardo stood before an aging apartment complex on New Orleans' outskirts. It wasn't dilapidated, but it had clearly experienced better days: weathered walls, rusted balcony railings, a place filled with narratives where people once harbored grand aspirations but now lived within their means. Emma had mentioned apartment 3B. Leonardo adjusted the strap of his canvas bag and ascended the stairs, contemplating the man he was about to encounter. Proud, stubborn, a man who had constructed a life with his own hands, only to discover those hands failing him now. He knocked. Silence, then unhurried footsteps. The door creaked open. Brad stood there, thin but strong, slightly hunched, his salt and pepper hair framing a face etched with time. His sharp eyes examined Leonardo suspiciously. "Can I assist you?" Leonardo smiled gently. "Hello, I'm Leonardo. I heard about your craftsmanship, your restorations. I wanted to meet you." Brad frowned. "My craftsmanship?" Leonardo nodded. "Restoring history, that's an art form." Brad rubbed his chin. "That was long ago. But you still recall it." A pause. Then, reluctantly, Brad stepped aside. "Enter." The apartment was modest but immaculate, filled with wooden furniture, faded photographs, and hand-carved trinkets. Leonardo's gaze moved to the workbench in the corner, cluttered with unfinished wooden pieces. Brad was still creating. "Coffee?" Brad asked gruffly. "Certainly." As it brewed, Brad observed him skeptically. "What brings someone like you here?" Leonardo smiled. "I encountered Emma last night." Brad's expression hardened. "She shouldn't be singing in those establishments," he muttered. "She should be experiencing life, not." He stopped, shaking his head. "I never intended this for her." Leonardo leaned forward. "She does it because she loves you." Brad scoffed. "That's precisely the problem." He sipped his coffee silently. "She believes sufficient effort can rectify everything. That she can combat the inevitable." His voice lowered. "But I won't permit her to squander her life attempting to save mine." Leonardo chose his words carefully. "You taught her strength." Brad glanced up. "But strength isn't exclusively about solitary struggles. Sometimes, it involves recognizing when to allow others to struggle alongside you." Something flickered in Brad's eyes. Recognition. Then, just as swiftly, it vanished. "I don't accept handouts," he stated firmly. Leonardo smiled, reaching into his canvas bag. "Because I didn't bring one." He placed a small wooden box on the table. Brad frowned. "What's this?" "Something I discovered in an antique store. It reminded me of your craftsmanship." Cautiously, Brad lifted it. His fingers traced the intricate carvings, the smooth, aged wood. His hands recognized the craftsmanship instantly. For a moment, he seemed lost in contemplation. "You're an artist," Leonardo said softly. "And the world still requires artists." Brad looked up. His eyes were tired but not defeated. For the first time in a long while, his hands didn't feel weak. They felt like they still possessed creative potential. Leonardo departed Brad's apartment with a fresh concept. The old man's pride was unshakable. He'd never accept charity. But Leonardo had glimpsed something in his eyes, momentarily. A flicker of vitality. This wasn't about giving Brad something, it was about restoring what he had already constructed. Scrolling through his phone, Leonardo located the appropriate contact and initiated a call. "Didn't anticipate hearing from you in New Orleans," a familiar voice answered. Leonardo smiled slightly. "I have a proposition for you." 2 days later, Leonardo stood inside the historic Orpheum Theatre, one of New Orleans' oldest venues, which had hosted legendary performers. Tonight, it would host Emma. Leonardo had arranged everything discreetly. No media, no announcements, just one unforgettable evening. His contact, the theater proprietor, had agreed immediately. "I can ensure the venue is filled," he had said. "You just need to guarantee she performs." That was the challenging aspect. Emma would decline if she knew too much. Brad wouldn't accept gifts. But what if this wasn't presented as a gift? What if it represented recognition of talent? That evening, Leonardo met Emma outside her regular performance restaurant. "You returned," she remarked, surprised. "I have a question," Leonardo said. She tilted her head. "What is it?" He paused. "If given the opportunity to perform for an audience who came specifically to hear you, would you accept?" Emma hesitated. "I don't know." She glanced at the donation box she carried nightly. "I'm not a professional performer. I do this out of necessity." Leonardo shook his head. "No, you do it because it's intrinsic to your nature." Emma bit her lip. She had spent so long singing from necessity that she had forgotten the joy of performance for its own sake. Leonardo produced a ticket and handed it to her. "For tomorrow night. Just attend. That's my only request." Emma examined it, confused. "But why?" Leonardo smiled. "Because I think you'll discover something unexpected there." The following morning, Leonardo returned to Brad's apartment. "Back again," the old man muttered. Leonardo smirked. "I'm not easily discouraged." He placed a piece of wood on the table. Brad frowned. "What's this?" "A commission," Leonardo explained. "A theater downtown needs someone to restore its original woodwork. They require authentic craftsmanship." Brad scoffed. "And you thought of me?" Leonardo shrugged. "Your reputation speaks volumes." Brad traced his fingers over the wood, something shifting in his expression. "One night," Leonardo urged. "Visit the location. If you're not interested, you're free to walk away." Finally, the old man exhaled. "Fine. I'll go." Step 1 was completed. That evening, the Orpheum Theatre was filled to capacity. Leonardo stood backstage, watching strangers, locals, and musicians occupy the seats. They weren't attending just any performance. They had heard whispers of a girl with a voice that could suspend time. Emma arrived with Brad, her eyes widening at the grand theater. "This is..." She trailed off, overwhelmed. Leonardo smiled. "Something different." Brad, meanwhile, ran a hand over the wooden frames. "Someone restored this," he murmured. Leonardo crossed his arms. "Yes. And they need someone to maintain it." Brad eyed him. "You're serious?" "Completely." Something in the old man shifted. Perhaps this wasn't charity. Perhaps this was opportunity. Meanwhile, Emma continued staring at the stage when the theater owner approached. "You must be Emma." She nodded, confused. He smiled. "We'd appreciate hearing you perform tonight." Emma's eyes widened. "What?" He gestured to the crowd. "They came for you." Emma froze. "I can't do this," she whispered. Leonardo placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "This isn't about money." Her voice was barely audible. "Then what is it about?" Leonardo smiled. "It's about you." The lights dimmed. The audience quieted. Emma moved toward the microphone. Her heart raced. Her hands trembled. She had never been more terrified. But for the first time in a long while, she had never felt more alive. Emma stepped onto the grand stage of the Orpheum Theatre, her hands trembling. The lights were blinding, the audience overwhelming. She wasn't prepared. She had always sung for survival, to keep her grandfather alive. But this? This was fundamentally different. She turned to Leonardo, panic evident in her expression. "I can't do this," she whispered. Leonardo knelt beside her, his voice calm. "You don't have to. But if you don't, you might always wonder, what if?" Emma's breath caught. This wasn't about money. It was about believing in herself. The theater fell silent as Leonardo seated himself at the grand piano, his fingers pressing into the keys, playing a melody that evoked comfort and familiarity. Emma closed her eyes. Then she sang. Her voice started softly, hesitantly. But as she surrendered to the music, allowed herself to experience it fully, it grew stronger, richer, infused with every emotion she had suppressed for years. The audience leaned forward, captivated. This wasn't merely a performance. This was her truth. As the final note faded, a profound silence enveloped the room. Then, thunderous applause erupted. A standing ovation. Emma stood motionless, staring at the cheering crowd. They weren't applauding from pity or sympathy. They had heard her, truly heard her. For the first time, she felt acknowledged. From the stage's periphery, Brad watched, his hands shaking not from illness but from emotion. For so long, he had distanced Emma, believing he was protecting her. But she had never been burdened. She had been becoming. Emma met his gaze, tears in her eyes. "I'll undergo the surgery," Brad said softly. A sob escaped her lips as she rushed to him, embracing him. She had been fighting for so long. Now, she could finally breathe. The theater owner stepped onto the stage, smiling. "Thanks to this incredible community's generosity, we've raised sufficient funds to cover Brad's medical procedure." The crowd erupted again, but Emma barely registered it. This wasn't solely about saving her grandfather. It was about transforming everything. As the crowd cheered, Leonardo knew something deeper had occurred tonight, because sometimes, life's most significant moments aren't merely about survival. They're about becoming the person you were always destined to be. Thank you for watching. I hope you all enjoy this video and learned a lesson. I would be grateful for your likes, and don't forget to subscribe and comment on the video. See you soon.